She tased my wife. Yeah, you heard that right. Our HOA president standing in our front yard tasered my pregnant wife while she was having contractions. And as my wife screamed and collapsed beside the birthing stone we placed for the baby, we lost. Cheryl just stood there calm as ever and said, "This is an HOA violation." That's the moment I realized this wasn't about community rules anymore. It was about control. My name's Marcus Redden. I inspect emergency medical equipment across 3 counties. I've spent years making sure systems don't fail when lives depend on them. But nothing prepared me for the system that failed right in my own front yard. That stone, the one Cheryl called a decorative hazard, wasn't decoration. My wife Leah meditates beside it every morning. It's where we buried letters to the child we never got to meet. And now she was on her knees beside it, gripping her belly, begging for air, while Cheryl, clipboard in hand, acted like she was saving the neighborhood from sin. "Cheryl, put the damn taser down," I shouted, but she didn't. She looked right at me and said flatly, "You were given 30 days to remove the unauthorized yard item." Then she fired. The crack of electricity snapped through the air, and Leah's scream, "It's something I'll never forget." I dropped beside her, tried to steady her breathing. "Stay with me, Leah. Stay with me." Cheryl didn't blink. "This is enforcement," she said. Enforcement. Like tasing a pregnant woman was part of her HOA safety policy. The ambulance pulled up, lights cutting through dusk. I pointed right at Cheryl. "She tased my wife. She's the HOA president. She thinks that gives her police powers." The EMT looked stunned. "How far along?" 34 weeks, I said. We were headed to the hospital. Cheryl just crossed her arms, muttering something about trespassing on regulated property. When the EMT asked for an incident code, I said it clearly. "Report this under 527 assault on a pregnant civilian during medical distress." Cheryl looked at me like she'd lost control for the first time. Good. Because from that moment on, I was done being quiet. At the hospital, the lights were too bright, too clean, like the world refused to soften even for pain. The doctor told me the taser caused trauma that triggered premature contractions. I sat there holding Leah's hand, feeling useless. "Did she get arrested?" she whispered. I couldn't answer. Cheryl had walked away, clipboard and all. Not even a question from the cops. And that silence, it burned more than anything. That night when I got home, her SUV was still parked across the street. Same white clipboard on the dash, same HOA badge clipped to the mirror. I didn't go inside. I went straight to my truck and pulled out a brown envelope, my state-issued inspector credentials. I wasn't a cop, but I knew how systems worked. And Cheryl, she'd just activated all of them. The next morning I filed complaints with every oversight board I knew, EMS, Health Department, Internal Affairs. I didn't mention the HOA once. I used terms like unlicensed deployment of an electronic restraint device and impersonation of safety personnel. You don't write angry in a report, you write surgical. You build a guillotine one sentence at a time. That night I walked around the neighborhood. Lights flicked on behind curtains. Nobody said a word. Cheryl had ruled through fear for years, fining people for mailbox colors, sending letters to employers, even ruining a neighbor's house sale by dumping trash in the street. But now she'd crossed into violence, and I was going to make sure she never hid behind rules again. Days passed. I barely slept. Leah was still in the hospital, hooked to monitors. Every beep reminded me of that taser crack. And I'll admit there was a moment I almost gave up. I sat in the dark staring at the birthing stone, wondering if maybe I'd pushed too hard, if maybe fighting her meant risking Leah's peace. That's the moment doubt creeps in, the moment you start to believe maybe the tyrant is right. But then I remembered the sound of Leah's scream. I remembered Cheryl's face, calm, self-righteous. And I knew I wasn't the one who'd gone too far. She had. A few mornings later I got an email from Rachel Tennyson, one of the HOA board members. It was short. I didn't agree to that vote. I wasn't even present when they posted the notice. Attached was proof, a screenshot of a work meeting at the same time Cheryl claimed she'd voted. Cheryl had forged her initials. That's when I smiled for the first time in days. The cracks were showing. Rachel and I met by the clubhouse. She looked terrified, like she was talking to a ghost. "She's trying to get ahead of it," Rachel whispered. "She's calling an emergency compliance meeting tonight. I asked if she was going. If I don't, she said there'll be no one left to push back." Then Cheryl's voice barked from inside Rachel. "Let's go." I saw the guilt in her eyes as she walked through that door. She wasn't Cheryl's ally, she was Cheryl's hostage. The next day, Cheryl sent a community email titled, "Clarification on Yesterday's Incident." According to her, Laya fell during a confrontation. Not a single word about the taser. Not one. She ended it with, "The HOA board stands united." That line made my stomach twist. I forwarded it straight to the State Oversight Division and labeled it Fabrication Pattern 1, because this wasn't over. She could rewrite emails, but she couldn't rewrite evidence. That evening I came home to find a notice duct taped to my door. Unauthorized display of symbolic or religious imagery. Mandatory hearing. They were trying to erase the birthing stone, our memory, our grief, our promise. And the kicker, Rachel's initials were on it again. Only this time she had proof she wasn't even there. Cheryl had forged it twice. I sent Rachel a message. "Can you prove it?" Minutes later she replied with a screenshot of her Zoom call time-stamped. That was my turning point. Cheryl wasn't just cruel, she was sloppy. Rachel kept sending more screenshots, internal chats, a message from Cheryl saying, "We'll need to backdate the vote to avoid questions. Just add Rachel's initials." She'd written her own confession. I saved every file, every timestamp. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Because in the world I worked in, documentation is power, and Cheryl had just handed me her downfall on paper. A week later I got a call. "Mr. Redden, this is Amanda Keller from the State EMS Oversight Division. We've reviewed your filings and the footage from Officer Grant's body cam. You were right. We're opening a formal compliance investigation." My chest tightened. She continued, "Cheryl Bostwick will be contacted today. She'll have 72 hours to respond. Failure to do so triggers immediate referral to the district attorney." When I hung up, I walked straight outside to the birthing stone. The grass around it was still blackened from the taser arc. I ran my hand over the sun engraving and whispered, "We're almost there." That night I got another email from the HOA's insurance company. Their response was one sentence: "Any physical enforcement act by a board member voids coverage." Translation: Cheryl just put the entire board's personal assets on the line. A few hours later, Rachel called. "Check your inbox." She'd sent a screenshot of Cheryl's latest message to the board. "We need to present this as self-defense. I'll file a motion to permanently ban Marcus and Laya from meetings. Rachel, I need your support." Rachel had replied with 2 words. "Not anymore." That was it. The moment fear shifted sides. 2 days later, Cheryl's SUV rolled down the street slower than usual. For the first time, she didn't look smug. She looked uncertain. And that's when I knew she felt it too. The ground beneath her was cracking. Rachel came to my house that night. She stood at the door with a folder in her hands, shaking. "I can't be part of this anymore," she said. Inside the folder were transcripts, Cheryl's voice recordings. In one of them, Cheryl said, "If we act soft now, the neighborhood will think anyone can resist compliance." She called my wife the subject. She called her taser a compliance tool. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "She told me I lacked the spine for leadership," she said. I looked at her and said quietly, "And yet here you are." I compiled everything. Emails, logs, recordings into one document. Glenridge Heights, pattern of abuse. When I handed it to the state investigator the next morning, I told her this wasn't an accident, it was doctrine. She believed she had the right to use force. The investigator nodded. "Then we'll make sure she learns she never did." Days passed. Then one afternoon, Amanda called again. "Mr. Redden, the Oversight Division has finished its review. We've referred the case to the district attorney for prosecution, felony battery, impersonation of authority, procedural fraud. And the HOA board's been warned, remove her or lose all insurance coverage." That night, Cheryl was removed from the board. They held the meeting in the same clubhouse she used to treat like her courtroom. But this time she wasn't at the head table. She sat in the second row silent. Rachel stood and read Cheryl's own words aloud. "We act soft. Now the neighborhood will think anyone can resist compliance." The room fell still. Someone whispered, "My God." Then Brian, the vice president, said, "All in favor of removing Cheryl Bostwick from the HOA, say aye." Dozens of voices filled the room. Cheryl didn't even lift her hand. When she stood, she looked smaller. Not weak, just hollow. "I only did what I thought was best for this community," she said. Then she walked out. No one clapped. No one spoke. Because justice doesn't always roar, it sometimes just exhales. I went home to a house that finally felt like mine again. The birthing stone was still there, framed by new grass. The scorch marks had faded, but I kept one thing, Cheryl's incident draft. The one where she wrote "Subject Redden Household. Action taken, direct application of compliance tool." I sealed it in plastic and slid it under the stone. Not out of spite, out of truth. Because this was what unchecked power looks like when it's finally stopped. The next morning, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up 3 houses down. I watched as the deputy handed Cheryl a paper at her door. She didn't slam it. She just closed it slowly, like she understood for once there were rules bigger than hers. And that was the end. You can build the neatest lawns, paint the prettiest fences, and hang all the flags you want, but the moment rules become weapons, the neighborhood stops being a community. It becomes a kingdom. And kings fall every time.